This is going to be a full analysis on the 56-page document of Kona Blue released by the Department of Homeland Security, which was then posted on the AARO website with UFO researcher Richard Dolan, the debrief chief Micah Hanks, and Fade to Black host Jimmy Church. Before we get into it, right off the bat, what I noticed in the document was a beach. You know what came to mind? This scene right here from Contact. And funny enough, I saw some comments that said the exact same thing of, you know what, that image looks just like this screenshot that we're seeing on screen right here. And my question is, to me, it looked a little bit too close. And I thought, is this a nudge or a little wink to people that are in the know for this? Or am I thinking a little too outside of the box? Before we get into like the meat and potatoes of this document, I'm going to bring in my special guests and hosts just to hear their thoughts on that alone. Jimmy, what did you think about the first image from the document?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Let's get that out of the way. Man, you're just jumping in, swinging for the fences out of the gate, Cristina. And I can't get out of my question, which is, what made you want to do this week?
Well, you know what? I think I will let Richard answer that question for me for the first time ever.
Yeah, Richard, the movie Contact, right? And that scene at the end of the movie is so dramatic, and it's so cool, and it's so emotional, and we all know that scene. This is eerily reminiscent of the movie Contact, isn't it?
It kind of is, although I agree with that. But when I saw it, I actually thought Kona Blue. With this, Kona Blue sounds like a tropical vacation package name. So it's like, hey, have Kona Blue come here to the beach. That was actually my first thought when I looked at that. But
mine was coffee, Kona Blue coffee. I swear I
could see you doing that on your show. Drink Kona Blue coffee, that rich, nutty flavor. You know, I could hear that.
It's dark. But yeah.
It is interesting imagery, and if they were trying to do a reference to Contact, I wouldn't be surprised. Because what we're seeing with Kona Blue is that, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead of anyone here, but this program, which a week ago I had no idea it even existed, or I hadn't really thought about it, but this clearly was at least one, if not of several, but at least one attempted continuation of the OSAP AATIP programs. And boy, is that interesting. I mean, we've all kind of known that AATIP didn't actually end in 2012, but we didn't really, I didn't, and I don't know if anyone else had detailed information about what might have proceeded afterward. And not that this actually supposedly went anywhere. This one supposedly didn't, but I'm going to definitely guess that there are programs that have continued onward.
And let's not get ahead of our skis, because I think that's a very, very, very important point. And as this document continues, I think that is one of the assessments that you naturally go to. Let me present this to everybody. Originally, when the AARO report came out last month and a half ago, in that report, it was, and Richard and I did a show on it, and Cristina and I did a show on it too as well. And it was just information. Okay, except the Kona Blue mention in there, for me, was the eye opener. I thought to myself, there's John Greenwald. There's your FOIA right there, right? Kona Blue. And that was going to happen. And in this case, the Department of the Defense released this on their own. Right now, the document that was released is 58 pages. It was declassified by Richard D. McComb, OHS, Chief of Security Officer, and he declassified it, Richard, I don't know if you caught this, on 7/18/2023. So this was declassified last year. So was this because of AARO reaching out? There was a letter also in the report about that declassification process and the release. The FOIA requests by John Greenwald, according to John, are still ongoing and are still being processed. The DOD document, when you look at page 1, and we'll start to break this apart in just a second, but the first point that is made is that this is a history and origin of Kona Blue. Point number 2, that Kona Blue was to be an extension of the OSAP AATIP program. And the third point that they bring out in the beginning is the letter. It's a letter to the Honorable Kathleen H. Hicks. There it is. Deputy Secretary of Defense from Christy Canagallo, acting Deputy Secretary of the DHS. Now, this is what the letter says. It says the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, agrees to provide the Department of Defense, DoD, with documents and relative information associated with Kona Blue. Kona Blue was a DHS prospective special access program, PSAP, terminated on February 10th, 2012. The following actions were taken. 1, all DHS documents associated with the Kona Blue PSAP, are declassified and approved for public release. Very interesting. The strikeout method was utilized to retain visibility of prior classifications, and redactions were made based on policy and legal review. Number 3, all pertinent DHS records have been searched and no additional information associated with the Kona Blue PSAP have been discovered. Now, I want you to scroll down a little bit, Cristina, if you can, because this is, you can, right there, stop. Okay. This is the top secret strikeouts that were just referenced. It says top secret, Kona Blue, no foreign. No foreign, for everybody, means not releasable to foreign nationals. I find that very interesting. And then underneath that, it says handle via special access channels only. Now, originally, that's the way this document was treated. It was top secret. And now you can see underneath that with the new classification of unclassified. Richard, when you saw the top secret, and Cristina, when you see the top secret Kona Blue no foreign classification applied to this, what went through your mind? The level of information that was in this document.
I'll jump in first, I guess, although Cristina should jump in as well. But well, the main thing that I was struck by is, I mean, if this, first of all, I did catch the July 18th, 2023 date when it was declassified. And that, of course, if anyone remembers, that was in the midst of all of the craziness going on with Congress and UAP hearings. This is when we were listening to David Grush. It was either that day or around that day. So everything was happening. The Schumer Amendment was introduced within a day or two of that, I think 2 days earlier. And so a lot was happening, and this clearly was part of that whole process, except no one, we didn't know about it. To your question, well, the other thing that struck me is, I mean, this program never really seemed to get off the ground. If it was canceled in 2012, that's when AATIP itself was, we're told, was canceled. And Kona Blue, which was supposed to be an extension of it, basically, you know, I mean, it did get this top secret status for, it had to be a very short period of time before it was ended. So it just seemed to have really gone nowhere.
What you mentioned, Richard, is actually a brilliant point of this document was released, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, during that time frame, during the whistleblower hearing that took place in Congress in July of last year. And the question is, why then? But on top of that, why is it being made public now? Before you answer that, actually, I'm seeing in the comments that people are saying, well, where's Micah? I know he did a pre-recorded segment for us. He's actually out of town recording some stuff. Yesterday was his birthday. by the way, so make sure to say happy birthday to him. But we will be playing that clip and his thoughts on this a little bit later. Now, going back to the question to both you, Jimmy, and Richard, why do you think, after sitting on it for so many months, why do you think it's being made public now? What, just because someone files FOIA, for instance, it doesn't mean that they have to comply. Why do you think it was released?
I'll jump in first because I thought about that a lot. And what we have going on at the same time, and we would have to assume this, John Greenwald has his connections at the Department of the Defense and the Pentagon. Everybody knows John Greenwald there. He makes a FOIA request, and I'm not saying he gets a hall pass and he goes to the front of the line, but he does have connections. He's got relationships that have been built up over 25 years. And so maybe the process had started on Kona Blue and the documents were pulled up and they were declassified and they were already redacted and they were labeled back in 2023 available for public release. So, yeah, now they said here that all documents pertaining to Kona Blue, this is it. This is all that there is. We'll see if John goes a step further and is able to pull something else out. Yeah. But I think that the Department of Defense just decided to release it because it was going to go FOIA. It's already been declassified and has been given the designation acceptable for public release. Mm-hmm. And so I just think that they just released it because there was no reason not to. And it was mentioned in the Arrow report, which was released to the public. That's just my assumption. But Richard, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that makes a lot of sense. I don't really take issue with anything you've just said there, Jimmy. I think, and also, I mean, I don't know what they're actually giving up here. There's some interesting new little tidbits, but essentially what they're giving up is a program that never got off the ground, so to speak, according to everything that they've said. So, you know, this is actually a lot easier. Remember 30 years ago, the whole remote viewing program was outed by DOD back in 1995, I think it was. In that case, the program was about to be outed as well. People like Jim Mars were doing research on it. And what they did at that time is they released it and had major spin out there saying, well, we tried this for a while, but it didn't really do anything. There was nothing about it that was unusual or successful, which was wrong, which was a lie. But this is how they do things. They give things up when they are able to downplay their significance. In the case of Kona Blue, there's really not a whole lot of meat to dig into. There's some interesting little breadcrumbs that are here that we hopefully we can discuss. But essentially what the Pentagon is publicizing here is a dead program that was essentially, if I can say this, stillborn. It didn't really go anywhere once it started. It didn't have a life. And so from the Pentagon's PR point of view, and a lot of this is all about PR, you know, they could honestly say they're really not giving up anything that's all that significant.
Now, let's stay on that point for a second, if we can. If you are reviewing a proposal like this, and you know, especially at that level of advancing from a PSAP, a proposed SAP, to SAP status under full protective status of an SAP, which is outlined in this proposal on why it should be a special access program, that you know that these programs are already in place, right? Lockheed is doing their thing. General Electric is doing their thing. We've got stuff going on at Edwards and Area 51 and Northrop Grumman and
we might take issue with that. I don't know how widespread these special access programs really are to even highly responsible officials. I mean, look, we all a couple of years ago went through the whole Davis Wilson saga, but I just will remind listeners that when you get into the implications of that document, there is little to no genuine oversight over multiple special access programs dealing with ET or alien tech in one form or another. Wilson discovered, I mean, there was a tiny group of people within the what was called SAPOC, the Special Access Programs Oversight Committee within the Office of the Undersecretary, Austat, Undersecretary of Science and Technology. I forget the total acronym, but you've got maybe 3 or 4 people who seem to have had any kind of oversight over these. And that's within the Defense Department. Congress would have no information about this whatsoever. So these programs are really very, very tightly guarded. And it's not clear to me that, like what you're just saying here, that people reviewing this proposed program would have any idea that there were multiple other such programs out there, unless they went through a process like what Wilson had gone through. So I'm not so sure.
Not just tightly guarded, Richard, but as we're seeing in this graph right here, it's very compartmentalized. You have the DHS, and then you have all of these companies getting their hands involved in this research as well, which we can assume happens with a lot of these types of programs where the right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. For me, I find it interesting that it's even displayed in this document exactly what people have been considering for the last few decades. Jimmy, for you, when you came across this graph, what was going through your mind in that moment?
I think that this page and the ones immediately after it, specifically page 11, starts to reveal this. Now, let me jump into this. On page 10, is the budgeting and the proposed funding necessary to complete the effort of reverse engineering this craft, figuring out how it works, applying remote viewing, a consciousness center, and all of that. Fiscal year 2012 was a minimum of $12 million. Fiscal year 2013 was $25 million. Fiscal year 14, 35 to 50 million. And then it jumps to fiscal year 17 plus to be determined. And then on page 11, Richard, I want to point all of this out to you and then get your analysis on this, because it says there's going to be 4 centers here. And all of them remind me of Bigelow. Bigelow's name was redacted. The only thing that was there was a few things redacted, but Bigelow as the building owner was redacted. We'll get to that. Number 1, the National Institute for Discovery Center. Well, that certainly sounds like NIDS to me, right?
Did you say Discovery Center or Discovery Science? That's what.
No, in this proposal it says center. It doesn't say Discovery Science. Okay, so that's the National Institute for Discovery Center, the Data Collection Division, the Experimental Division, which is labeled here, it's Skinwalker Ranch. They talk about it very specifically. The Medical Division and the Data Analysis Division. Number 2, the Advanced Technology Center that would access recovered advanced technology and any earlier assessments to determine threat capability and any potential countermeasures possible against the advanced technology. Next point, collect oral histories from already identified sources, retired military, intelligence, contractor personnel, to assist in locating additional recovered advanced technology. That's a very interesting point in this. Number 3, the Consciousness Center, right? Collect critical data utilizing remote sensing, remote viewing, in order to determine the activity and purpose of the advanced technology, especially any threat posed. In an expanded role, remote sensing and related techniques may present an invaluable aid in countering illicit activities conducted against the United States, and demonstrations of a capability will be made. Okay, and the last point, the Integration Center. The focal point for the integration of information and data from other centers and report in writing follow on basic and applied research proposals and efforts to be identified. And then it follows up on page 19. It mentions what Jacques Vallée has talked about, the 200,000 reports, right? And describes each center on that page. Now, what do you think about this breakdown? Is this just BASS? Is this just NIDS? And is this OSAP part 2?
Well, yeah. What it struck me as and strikes me as is these guys. We're really talking about the NIDS organization, Bigelow, and everyone with him. Have to assume people like Hal Puthoff, have to assume other people were kind of read into this. I'm going to guess Kit Green. Don't know. I'm going to guess John Alexander. I'm going to guess Jacques Vallée. They all, I believe that they and the military people that they've talked to, because all of this is acting as if we're having covert military encounters with these craft, and we can't deal with them. I mean, to me, this sounds like a secret little alarm bell that's going off by them. Lots of folks in the UFO field love to talk about how the Pentagon's engaging in fear mongering, talking about potential threats. I mean, how many times have I heard people go after Lou Elizondo for that? But from my point of view, when I look at the history of this phenomenon and its encounters with the United States military and militaries of other nations, because the U.S. is not alone, there are countless confrontational and at times disturbing encounters that have taken place. Now, it's not like an Independence Day where they're trying to blow up the White House, but they have the ability to disable very advanced technology that we have. And look, if you're in the military, you have to be concerned about that. It's your job. And so we're seeing that attitude displayed right here. There's a clear recognition that this is a genuine, real phenomenon that clearly they don't have a handle over or they don't have control over. This very much continues the track that what we know happened under OSAP when Hal Puthoff, working for Robert Bigelow, was contracted to get requests from roughly, I think, 50 scientists in different parts of the world on leading edge science issues connected to the UFO subject without him telling them that. So this is why, that they got papers on wormhole technology, wormhole theories, and physics of black holes and physics of invisibility and all of this stuff, which got roundly criticized by the mainstream scientific community that knew absolutely nothing about what's actually going on in this field. So they were trying to get a handle on the science back in like 2009 when those papers went out. And so now here we are just a few years later, and the exact same attitude is on display. It's an attempt to get on top of the science. What is the science of these AAVs, these advanced aerospace vehicles, as they call them? So nothing has changed. This was literally, you could say, almost a last gasp attempt by this group to keep their program going, and I would say almost desperate enough to try to get it anywhere, including DHS. Like, one would not normally think of DHS as housing it, although it's very interesting because special access programs can be hidden pretty much anywhere. I mean, we know about them in the DOD, we know about them in the CIA, we know about them in the Department of Energy, although no one seems to have any access or information about those. And they may be the most secret of all. But you could really, in theory, hide a special access program anywhere. And so on that basis, DHS could be perhaps useful, but it didn't go anywhere, apparently. At least not this one. I'm curious about any others that may actually
That's right. I think that's one of the best points. And staying on the reasons for justification for special access program status, there is a multiple tiered reason for that. And you have to address each one of those points. And if one of those points doesn't meet that criteria, it jumps down to another level below SAP. And I'll talk about that in a second. But they say here the justification for need, remote vision, right? Remote viewing, remote communication, right?
Yeah.
And both materialization techniques to observe, communicate, retrieve data, and transfer matter across dimensional and space-time barriers will undoubtedly be of utmost interest, if not a top collection priority, for adversarial intelligence security services. Countermeasures against such techniques would also be a collection priority.
Put a full stop there. So who's the adversary that we need to employ such techniques against, especially back in 2012?
Back in 20.
That's a serious question. But on top of that, they had mentioned those adversaries of being China and Russia, those countries to look out for. And Jimmy, I know that you're kind of addressing the document in certain segments word for word. Do you want to share the document so that people know where you're reading from?
That's fine. I'm on page 21 right now. So if you want to jump to page 21, because going back to Richard's point right there, when Richard said full stop, he's exactly right. Because the next point, and just scroll down, it's the justification for need. That's where I'm at right there. Is this B, recovered AAV technology exists in and is accessible only within an SAP construct. That's another full stop right there, Richard.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Special access programs. I mean, I'm sure many listeners do know this, but I'm sure there's some who don't. Special access program is your primordial black budget program. In other words, it's a program that Congress pays for, but doesn't know what they're paying for. That we pay for, and we don't know what we're paying for. In other words, they are, not only is the operation classified, but generally speaking, their very existence is classified. It's black, in other words. You can't see it. So, and what we know in the United States government is that there are many, many, many special access programs. I don't think anybody knows how many, but in all likelihood, there's been some studies on this every once in a while, and every time someone has looked into it, they're like, we're overrun with them. The government has a tremendous number of these programs, and they have limited to no oversight. And so if you've got a big, big secret, that's where you keep it. And plus, the special access programs typically have huge interest or a connection with private contractors, not just DoD personnel. In fact, primarily contractors, not DoD personnel.
Yeah, you can't audit. You
That's
can't trace the money. The budgeting and the spending, that's determined by whoever's receiving the funding. That's it. When you say no oversight, there is absolutely zero oversight. The GAO can't get involved.
I think about 5 years ago, Tom DeLonge did a tweet. I wish I could find it. I'm sure someone can. But he stated pretty clearly, he said, look, if anyone who wants to get to the bottom of this cover up, he said, we need a legal revolution. And I think he was talking exactly about this. Like the whole structure of secrecy, it's beyond classified. It's essentially privatized. And FOIA requests, you really have to wonder how effective they could possibly be with any of these SAPs. I think they've never been successful with special access.
Well, and Thomas Wilson addressed it, so elegantly. And this next point here, retrieval and integration, this is also on the same page, Cristina. Retrieval and integration of historical data from high-value personnel with knowledge of recovered AAV technology and present location of recovered material is accessible only within an SAP construct. Again, and this is exactly what Thomas Wilson was talking about, wasn't he, Richard?
Exactly. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Undue attention.
I'm sorry. You go on.
Let me just get these last 2 points in, and then we'll continue. Undue attention by other United States government or private sector entities not involved with the program or any international interest will directly or indirectly interfere with the daily program mission and perhaps threaten the overall success of the program. Due to a highly specialized nature of the program, overt acknowledgement of personnel involved in the program will lead to unnecessary security risk. In other words, SAP, total lockdown, total secrecy. There's no way any of this could get out. It represents the security directly of the United States.
Also, let's just state a couple of obvious things here, because it's easy to overlook the obvious. All this UAP, UFO technology is being militarized. It's all being militarized. It's all being turned into weapons. And we just take that for granted, by the way. I mean, we're just like, let's stop and think. We're dealing with the most incredible reality here. Non-humans of highly advanced capabilities that are here on planet Earth, obviously blanketing the Earth, sightings everywhere. So yes, that's a security concern. I'm not going to argue against that. But there's so much more. This is a genuine, deep, scientific, philosophical, existential issue. And yet all we ever hear is the military side of it, the national security side of it, which is completely locked down and being weaponized. And that I think is just a sad statement, personally. So
then we have, before we let you go, and Richard, thank you for taking the time today. This is some seriously breaking news. It's very fluid. And this broke yesterday. I called Richard last night. He's reviewing the document, and we just wanted to make sure that we were standing out in front of the community and bringing this forward. So, Richard, before I let you go, or before we say goodbye, I should say, not I, we. I want to bring this up on page 34. Go to page 34, Cristina, because we got an unredacted document until page 34. Is that 34? No, let's go to. It's page 34 has question number 7 on it. Right there. Okay, right there. Stop that. Right there. Okay, so question 6 on page 34, right there. You can see it. Question 6 is redacted. So we don't know. I find that very, very strange. Now, I looked at the context before and after that question. I have no idea what could have been there. That's interesting. It's the first redaction in the document. And then question 7, which is below, has the building owners' names redacted. Now, I'm going to say it's Bigelow. Right, I'm going to say that's Bigelow because there's a mention of what we can assume is Skinwalker Ranch with this comment, and you can see it right there, but the name is redacted. A 480-acre research property in Utah with a 15-year history of intensive anomalous activity is owned by redacted. The property is under 24/7 armed guard. Now, Richard, when you looked at this, you've got an unredacted document, but then we get here to this page where a question is redacted. It's very interesting what was in that question that wasn't okay for public release. It wasn't a name that was redacted. It was the question that was redacted.
It's a really good catch. I'm going to go back and review those questions and see what logically might fit in there. I haven't really thought about that.
Yeah, I tried to get the flow. Cristina, what did you think?
The possibilities are obviously endless, but maybe one of them could be pertaining to maybe a different area. It could also be pertaining to a specific Kona Blue question on who needs to maybe verify the information. Because what's interesting about this report is that it was on the bandwagon. I mean, it was ready to be signed off to be a real project, to really continue and do the research, but then it got dropped like a sack of hot potatoes. And the question is why? What's more interesting about this are all the factors that were included in this. So you have remote viewing, you have psychological tests as well, you have reverse engineering programs, you have research into technology, you have Bigelow involved in this, you have AATIP involved in this. And when you bring in all of those factors, yeah, I could definitely raise some red flags. But as Richard Dolan had mentioned a little bit earlier with SAPs, that there are so many that people just can't get a hold of how many there are. So even though this one might have failed, which anyone could easily say it's failed when in reality it's in action, but let's say that it flopped completely. There could be a handful of other projects doing the exact same thing, just merely under a different name. And so when we consider it from that angle,
and ongoing, Cristina.
Exactly.
Yes,
so when we consider it from that angle, people might think, oh man, this Kona Blue was BS, nothing to see here. There's still so much happening behind the scenes.
I'm gonna give my my final take before you guys kick me out of here. What I think happened, I mean, with OSAP and AATIP, how do they get formed? You have Bigelow talking with Harry Reid and a few other folks, and you know, hear what Lou Elizondo has to say about this. This is very consistent. What it looks like is an attempt by the NIDS center of gravity, Bigelow, those people, Bigelow, Putoff, Green, Eric Davis, Colm Kelleher, and their allies have always wanted to get to the center of the labyrinth. That's always been their goal. They all know a lot. They have always all known a lot. That's what NIDS was about in the 90s. And as NIDS morphed into BAS and this whole attempt to contract within the DoD, this, I believe, was an attempt by this group to get into the inner circle. You know, John Alexander did this kind of a thing back in the 1980s with his advanced theoretical physics group. It was another attempt to kind of get to that holy grail. And I'm just taking a guess, suspect that there are people who are within the Pentagon who are saying, oh, no, not you. We have programs for this. But they were able to succeed enough to get OSAP through and to get AATIP through for a little while with minimal funding, but they were able to get it approved for a little while until it ran into enough enemies that it was killed. And this Kona Blue, I would be inclined to interpret as another attempt by this group to get back in, to keep it going under a different guise.
And to your point, Richard, that if you go back to SRI and all the players here, Hal Putoff and of course Kit Green and others, all had connections and were well versed with working with the CIA and other defense departments and intelligence agencies. And this was nothing new. They were always part of the mechanism and the machine that was operating.
Yeah.
Now, so it wasn't like they were kids, that never played in the sandbox. They knew about the bureaucracy and how this game is played. And the intelligence world is spooky. That's exactly what it is. Now, let me get to this, and then we'll let you go. This is page 58. You go to the last page of the document. Page 58. This is the conclusion. It says, in November 2009, at the request of the Undersecretary of Defense for Intelligence, DTA completed a review of the program. The agency determined that, based on classification levels of current and projected deliverables, insufficient grounds existed to classify the program, invoke an ACCM, I'll get to that in a second, or establish a restricted SAP. It wasn't of that classification level to them. Now, what is an ACCM?
It is alternative control compulsory measures. What is it?
That's right.
Yeah.
And so it's a level below special access
Close, though.
program.
It's very close.
It's very, very close. The ACCM alternative or compensatory control measures are security measures used to safeguard classified intelligence or operations and support information when normal measures are insufficient to achieve strict need-to-know controls and where SAP controls are not required. So that's your fallback, is your ACCM if you don't get a SAP status.
There's a lot of a lack of control over those as well, from at least when I studied this a number of years ago.
Yes.
As well.
So what's your general take, Richard? Do you think that the Kona Blue was unnecessary because other programs were already in place? Or you drop the word consciousness and remote viewing and paranormal, and that scares everybody away? I mean,
I have a feeling, I mean, this is not to malign any of the people involved. I mean, Robert Bigelow's a brilliant man. Putoff is a brilliant man and is a friend of mine. I admire Hal. And a lot of these other folks, they're amazing. But I think they were not welcome to the party. That's what I suspect. I think that this type of program undoubtedly, I'm assuming, exists in some form or in multiple forms, but just not them. I suspect that there's political machinations going on. There was some resistance to bringing in more this group of people for whatever reason. And I suspect that the question that was totally redacted, I'm just guessing. I mean, this is, you can really see that there's a deep, deep knowledge of this phenomenon by the authors of this document. This is, they're sophisticated. We didn't even get into the consciousness connection with aerospace or aviation vehicles, or that sounds so out there, but to these guys, that's run of the mill. Like, this kind of idea is not that shocking to them. I mean, it's interesting. I don't want to say run of the mill, but it's not like they have to have these hurdles to believe it. And I suspect that whatever they wrote in question number 6 was something that to them was quite obvious, but that to the people in charge of the security classifications was like, no, this is not going out to the general public. I suspect it might even include a direct recognition of, or a direct acknowledgement of an ET reality or something like that. Right.
Which
all those people know. They don't think, they don't hope, they don't think, they know this is real. And they know there are non-human intelligences operating here.
Now, Richard, thank you. We're going to let you go. I just want to ask you one question on behalf of Cristina and I for the community. What's the publication date of the USO book? And don't play around. What's the date?
I'm not playing around. I'm really excited about it. I'm getting it. I have an illustrator who's he's doing amazing work. This is going to be the most illustrated book, I think, that we have in our field. We're closing it. It'll be more than 800 pages total. So I'm publishing it in 2 volumes simultaneously. I have to. I was hoping for May. May won't happen, but I think July can absolutely happen. Believe me, I want this thing done. So because I want to be able to move on to other projects. So June or July, I think, is not unrealistic. I'm working on it every day. I'm working on this every single day.
Keep doing what you're doing, my brother. Cristina?
Richard, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your thoughts with us, because what you bring to the table is like nobody else. You definitely have a better understanding of government and government written letters and documents compared to most people. So having you on and sharing your insights, I know a lot of people find it very valuable. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much, Cristina and Jimmy. It was really fun, and it was interesting to be on here with you. I'm glad we got to talk about this.
Big day. Thank you so much, Richard. Behave and be well. Give my best to Tracy. All right.
So but the next person I'd like to bring on is Micah for this next segment while we still have a few minutes left. And so while I do that, Jimmy, tell us what was on your mind just then.
Well, it's the point that I think is so relevant here is the consciousness aspect to this document. There are references to Skinwalker Ranch and so forth, but when you go to page 23, and I want everybody to open up the report. You can get it from the Black Vault. You can download it yourself. Go to page 23. There's a point there that says, to utilize selected investigations from other professional groups with experience in AAV investigations. This will increase data collection coverage of these events in the United States. And that is very telling that these events have been ongoing and there are other investigations and reports about this out there, and it needs to be collected and reviewed. And then when you go to page 30, it says this: the Consciousness Center. Okay. Now there are different buildings, different locations, right? Okay. So the Consciousness Center manages the acquisition, training, and utilization of remote viewers and communicators. These unorthodox techniques may prove to be critical collection methods for supplementing efforts within the data collection, advanced technology, and especially the experimental and medical centers. Very, very interesting about the consciousness angle of communication, what is going on with AAVs, and they know something is going on. And by touching upon this, which Richard mentioned earlier, this is nothing new to the Department of Defense or to the DIA. They know that there's a consciousness connection with ET and these materials and these craft. And that by putting this in there in the proposal is like Richard said, and I caught this too, it's to catch their attention because they understand what is going on here. It's very interesting. You got Micah ready to go?
I do. Let's go ahead and play it.
DE's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office has officially released documents associated with a mysterious government program known as codename Kona Blue. And here for Christina's listeners, we're going to do a quick analysis. So the story behind these documents is that this was a program that was initially pitched to the State Department, and this actually following a more well-known official government program that was operated out of another agency, more on that in a moment. But Kona Blue first came to light with the issuance of the official historical review that was released by the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or AARO, back in March. Now, a few points before we get into Kona Blue must be made about the AARO historical report because, namely, it was chock full of errors. Despite the fact that the former director of AARO, Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick, claimed that it was an exhaustive, rigorous analysis of the United States government's history of involvement with UFOs and, of course, UFO programs, there were several facts they didn't manage to get correct. For instance, the famous sighting by pilot Kenneth Arnold from June of 1947 was off by a day, according to AARO's report. One of the directors of Project Blue Book, John Friend, had also been incorrect in the report. An analysis that was performed by the Battelle Memorial Institute for Project Blue Book back in the early 1950s, known as Project Stork, was not referred to by its actual name, but by a dummy nickname that had been given to the program, Project Bear, by the first director of Blue Book, Edward Ruppelt. In other words, AARO's investigators seemingly didn't look any deeper than what Ruppelt wrote about the program and didn't bother to go find its actual name. Details about an alleged fragment shot off of a UFO in 1952 were incorrectly stated based on earlier incorrect assessments made by the Condon Committee, otherwise known as the University of Colorado UFO Project, which was managed by Edward U. Condon, a physicist, on behalf of the Air Force back in the late 1960s. And the Condon Committee's erroneous conclusions were based on bad information that appeared in a popular UFO book called Flying Saucers: Serious Business by Frank Edwards. Anyway, the list goes on. The broader point here is that AARO's report can hardly be taken seriously because it's so rife with errors. And yet, despite all the factual inaccuracies, there were a few revelations in the historical report including the fact that there were a lot of secret programs, the majority of which were unnamed, and these programs supposedly feature U.S. technologies that are highly advanced, and which Aero investigators concluded that the witnesses who claimed they had seen UAP-like technologies had actually seen the technologies developed by these special access programs deep within the United States government. So there was no evidence of ET, according to Aero's investigators, but there was one program they were able to name at the time that the historical report was published, and that was the State Department program known as Kona Blue. And in fact, following the release of the historical report by Aero, there was an additional series of documents uploaded to Aero's website, which provide not only a brief history of what Kona Blue is and how Aero found it, but also some newly declassified documents that actually detail what precisely Kona Blue was, or perhaps more appropriately, we could say what it was supposed to have been because it was canceled shortly after it got off the ground. Now, first, a bit of history. According to their own documents released recently at the Aero website, the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office first learned of the Kona Blue program from interviews conducted as part of its historical review. The authors state that multiple interviewees identified Kona Blue as a Department of Homeland Security sensitive compartment established to protect the retrieval and exploitation of non-human biologics. Now, right there, of course, this sounds almost like a game changer because here we have a program within the Department of Homeland Security that multiple interviewees identified as having been a sensitive compartment established essentially to retrieve and protect and potentially exploit any non-human technologies that might have come into the possession of the United States government. But it's important to point out that as Aero describes, Aero researched the information provided by the interviewees and learned Kona Blue was a prospective special access program. It had been proposed to DHS leadership but was never approved or formally established. That's right, apparently it was approved initially, but just 6 months later it was actually shut down before it could even get off the ground due to a lack of merit. According to Aero, Kona Blue never received any materials or funding, and there's no information beyond the proposal presentation marked with the Kona Blue name. So unfortunately, as far as things currently stand, Kona Blue isn't exactly the smoking gun that many of the interviewees that Aero spoke with had believed it to be. But there is still more to this story. As Aero's own history goes on to say, they trace the origin of the proposal for Kona Blue to the Advanced Aerospace Weapons Systems Application Program, or AATIP, also known by its unclassified nickname, AATIP, or the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, which was managed by the Defense Intelligence Agency from 2009 to 2012 and funded through congressional earmarks. In other words, the origins of Kona Blue had actually been in the earlier predecessor program within the DIA known as AATIP. The program was officially run between about 2009 and 2012 by a DIA scientist named James Lakatsky and was essentially managed by the staff of a company known as Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, which was a subsidiary of the aerospace company founded by real estate mogul Robert Bigelow, and essentially managed by several of the staff members now working for Bigelow Aerospace Advanced Space Studies, who had previously worked with one of Bigelow's civilian projects known as the National Institute for Discovery Sciences, otherwise known as NIDS, and that had been the organization which carried out the investigations famously at Skinwalker Ranch several years before the ALSAP contract was ever awarded via the DIA. And there's actually quite a lot that's known about the ALSAP program since there were official memoirs that were co-authored by Lakatsky, along with the deputy director of ALSAP, Dr. Colum Kelleher, and also journalist George Knapp. These two books, effectively written as sequels to Knapp and Kelleher's earlier work, Hunt for the Skinwalker, which documented NIDS' original investigations at Skinwalker Ranch, provide us quite a few insights into what the scientists who were part of the DIA team were doing out there at Skinwalker Ranch and what their broader UAP investigations entailed. For starters, ALSAP officials have been spending a lot of time heading down to Brazil and interviewing Brazilian ufologists and military officials about incidents that had been occurring down there, specifically around the vicinity of Colares in northern Brazil back in the 1970s, where a sudden spate of UAP sightings actually prompted a Brazilian Air Force investigation known as Opera Sao Prato, which roughly translates to mean Operation Plate or Saucer. In addition to that, there was also a massive database of more than 200,000 UAP sightings that was assembled by ALSAP, known as Capella. And the effort to build Capella had been led by none other than computer scientist and longtime UFO researcher Jacques Vallée, who also assisted the ALSAP program. Now, according to Kelleher, Knapp, and Lakatsky in their book Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, the program ran for about 2 years, And when they attempted to try and lengthen the life of the program, they went to Nevada Senator Harry Reid and asked him to intervene on trying to get additional funding so that the program could continue. At that time, AATIP received its official unclassified nickname, AATIP, and then Senator Reid essentially went to bat for the program trying to extend its life, but that effort failed. And so with AATIP now dead in the water, some of its staff at that point tried to lengthen the program's lifespan in a different way, by reviving essentially the same program but within an entirely different agency and under an entirely different code name. And hence, AATIP and AATIP was pitched to the State Department under the code name Kona Blue. Now, as Arrow also states in their recent documentation, Kona Blue had been established under the presumption that there actually were already retrievals in the United States government's holdings that seemed to have come from non-human origin, and they had hoped that by establishing this program within the State Department, any of these supposedly alien technologies would be passed on to Kona Blue officials, and they would thereafter become the official agency tasked with studying these things. According to Arrow's own history of the program, released along with the declassified documents posted at its website, in 2011, the DHS, under Secretary for Science and Technology, established Kona Blue as a protected special access program based on claims that relevant information and material existed and required this level of protection. The Undersecretary also cited congressional interest in the subject and possible impacts on Homeland Security as part of the justification for the program. 6 months later, however, as previously noted, the Department Secretary of DHS disapproved Kona Blue as a special access program and further directed its immediate termination, citing concerns about the adequacy of justification for the program and sufficiency of information central to the proposal development, including personnel and budget requirements. So in other words, according to Arrow, none of the material that the would-be Kona Blue officials, of course previously AATIP officials, believed was in government holdings was found to exist, and hence Kona Blue wasn't established. But there are some more aspects to this that are worthy of consideration because in their most recent book, Inside the U.S. Government Covert UFO Program, Initial Revelations by James Lakatsky, Colm Kelleher, and George Knapp, Lakatsky makes reference to having knowledge of some kind of an extraordinary aircraft that he believed was in the United States government's possession. Right at the beginning of Chapter 9 in the book, he writes, at the conclusion of a 2011 meeting in the Capitol building with a U.S. Senator and an agency undersecretary, Lakatsky, the only one of this book's authors present, posed a question. He stated that the United States was in possession of a craft of unknown origin and had successfully gained access to its interior. This craft had a streamlined configuration suitable for aerodynamic flight, but no intakes, exhaust, wings, or control surfaces. In fact, it appeared not to have an engine, fuel tanks, or fuel. Lakatsky added, what was the purpose of this craft? Was it a life support craft useful only for atmospheric re-entry, or what? If it was a spacecraft, then how did it operate? At that point, the chapter's focus shifts over to a pair of Defense Intelligence reference documents, which seemingly describe similar aspects of these observed UAP design and performance characteristics. But one has to wonder exactly what Lakatsky was referring to. Had he merely heard about this alleged craft of unknown origin secondhand, or did he have firsthand knowledge, and had this been the basis for why Kona Blue presumed that there indeed were such craft in the U.S. government's holdings? It's a good question, and one perhaps worthy of further consideration, although according to Dr. Sean Kirkpatrick and Arrow, essentially the entire basis for all of this had just been government officials who believed these things and who had repeated these rumors to each other for years, effectively constituting what Kirkpatrick called a self-licking ice cream cone. One would have to think that there would be a little more to all this than just unsubstantiated rumors that people who worked in government have been hearing for decades and telling to each other, and thereby giving rise to this monumental space-age myth. And in fairness, given all the inaccuracies in the recent Arrow report, many of us out here have continued to wonder just how accurate the other findings involving alleged UFO programs within the United States government, or maybe the lack thereof, actually are. So while Kona Blue perhaps isn't the smoking gun that many people had actually thought it would be, and the newest documents released by Arrow tell us little more than what we already knew, it seems reasonable to presume that there probably still is a little more to the ongoing saga of the U.S. government's involvement with UAP investigations than what the public has been told.
There's a lot to take from that, but before I even say anything, Micah is an audiobook reader. Like, even if he's not, he is. Okay? Anything he reads, it just sounds like it just came out as something from an audiobook. But he brings up some really great points here, and he does a very interesting dive into this topic, bringing in a little bit more history that we haven't mentioned here on this show or that you hear very often. So he talks about AATIP and a little bit of behind the scenes on that. He talks about Lakatsky as well. And when you're bringing in all of these factors, it just makes Kona Blue that much more interesting. But Jimmy, I gotta throw this over to you. From what you understood from what Micah Hanks had said, what can you add to that?
Okay, a couple of interesting points. First off, Lakatsky never saw or went inside any alien craft. Never did. I'm calling him out. You know why? You know why I know that as fact? We know his name. Therefore, he did not go into sea or anything else. It's a great story. It's probably secondhand. But there's that part of it. I would love for it to be true. Okay, there's that part. The second part that Micah brings up, and Richard talked about this earlier, it is the weaponized side of this, the Department of Defense, and taking this technology into another direction. It never goes into the public sector. It's not going to heat our schools. It's not going to farm our crops or give us, flying cars. That's never going to happen. And there's this other part in the proposal of Kona Blue, which again is feeding into the funding environment. You're trying to get to the money, right? You're trying to get this project off of the ground. You're trying to get SAP status. So how do you do that? Well, you trigger just like the media triggers the public, right? With fear and threats. So if we go to page 8 of the proposal, it says this knowledge-based research addresses the analytical assumptions and uncertainties of emerging and disruptive technologies or material that could potentially threaten vital and major U.S. interests, such as the security of land, air, and sea borders, and citizens, or critical infrastructure or economic resources. That's it. It threatens everything. So we need SAP status. This is the most important technology in human history. We need to keep it under wraps. It affects every aspect of the United States national security at every level, from the citizens to the borders, to the air, to the sea, to the economy. Every single vital interest of the United States is affected by this information. And they threw that. That's the Hail Mary pass, right? That's the Hail Mary covering all of the bases, trying to get Kona Blue funded. So yes, Richard's right. Micah's right. And that is what we can pull from this document. It's an important document. And I think that it shows why the interest is there, number one. Two, what is the government and the Department of Defense and DIA, what is their position on this, and what are the hot buttons that are being pushed for them to get their attention? There's that aspect of it. And the other part of it is, if this is being proposed, what other machines are currently operating doing the exact same thing, and that Kona Blue was just deemed redundant? And I'll leave it right there, Cristina.
I think that's a great place to end it, because you have answered so many of the things that were in my mind as well that I actually wanted to ask you on. You beat me to it, but you're right. Why are there other projects that were redundant that people thought, oh, you know what, we don't need Kona Blue anymore? This is a question that I know it's on your mind, it's on my mind, and probably so many others as well. Before we end today's analysis, what do you think, in one sentence, the biggest takeaway is from this report?
I think Okay, let's go to the alternate view. Okay, let's just do an alternate view of this. Was this proposed for the good of humanity, for getting to the bottom line and getting to the center of ET and the alien question that Richard talked about? All right, is it that? Or is it just a money grab? A money grab at free money that doesn't get audited. Is it just that? Now, when we look at this, is just, I'm just want people to think a little bit about this. When we look at OSAP, $22 million. Now, we talk about that all the time, $22 million. It wasn't $22 million. It was $10 million one year, $12 million the second year. That's how we got to $22 million. What did the $22 million pay for? $10 million in one year, $22 million the second year. What did it pay for? It paid for reports. That's it. That's it. Theoretical looks at the future. That's what it paid for. So is it just a money grab where you get paid $500,000 as an author to type up a report of your science fiction view of wormholes or whatever, propulsion systems or anti-gravity or stealth technology, whatever it is? Is it just a way to get to government money? Now, I'm not saying that that is the case, but what was the $22 million really spent on? That's it. I mean, there wasn't like they used the $22 million to go and rent some flatbed trucks and move a flying saucer in a crash craft from one state to another and to park it into a warehouse that they're paying rent on and leasing. And they take it apart. They've got a laboratory with scientists and they're pulling parts off of it and they're analyzing it and they're looking forget about that fantasy. That's not what the $22 million was spent on. The $22 million was spent on paper. That's it. Some laptops. That I'm not now. Is that the funding environment that we're talking about here? And you look at the budget proposals. Now, there's no question that we all are fascinated with this. And that we would like to get these answers, and that maybe there is a genuine interest with all of these individuals, and there probably is. I'm not going to question that part of it. But what does that kind of funding get you? And with OSAP and AATIP is an acronym that I don't think is applied. But OSAP itself, that was $22 million spent on a report that was this thick when you printed it out. That's it. And I'll leave it there. Cristina, thank you so much. What am I doing tonight on Fade to Black? Britt Elders is with us. She's been doing research into ET and UFOs and contact for over 50 years. Shot a lot of documentaries, a lot of research, been all around the world. She's amazing. First time on Fade to Black. I can't believe it. Britt Elders is with us. So I'll see everybody tonight. Cristina, another great show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And we were able to cover so much in a short period of time, hearing multiple people's opinion. We got to hear from UFO researcher Richard Dolan. We got to hear from the debrief editor-in-chief, Micah Hanks, and of course, Jimmy Church and myself as well. It's really interesting to go over these reports, but very specifically to hear it from different perspectives, because there were a few things that Micah mentioned, that Richard mentioned, and that Jimmy mentioned that I didn't even consider. And so when we have these roundtables, I think they are very valuable. Before you head out, please make sure to like this video if and only if you enjoyed the show. Subscribe if you haven't already, as I do 3 shows right here every single week. And if you feel like you need more shows, I got you. I just made another channel called Fact Sophical, which is about fun facts, random information, life hacks, so much more. Scan this QR code. It'll take you straight there. And if you need help relaxing, falling asleep, or using your imagination to wander the universe, take a look at my music channel called Cosmic Portals. There I make space ambient music just for you and for myself because I have insomnia. It helps me. Hopefully it helps you as well. And another super duper fun fact, aside from Faxophical, is I write articles for all of the shows right here. If you need more bite-sized information, or if you're more of a reader than looking at videos, I got you. That link is right here in this QR code, also down below as well. Or you can find it on my website at strangeparadigms.com. That is it for today. I will see you tomorrow for Strangest News of the Week. Be safe, and remember, keep your eyes on the skies. If you enjoy the strange and the mysterious, UFOs, the paranormal, and cryptids, this channel is for you. So make sure to subscribe, as I do 3 videos right here every single week, and hit that notification bell so you do not miss any of the bonus content I post right here.